So we just heard from two Assembly members who have serious concerns about hydrofracking. Today, several town supervisors and landowners were down at the Capitol making the case that fracking is needed to boost the upstate economy. I am joined now by Scott Kurkoski. He is counsel for the Joint Landowners Coalition. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. That word, forget it. I'm just not going to be able to say it. This is, okay, obviously you are from the pro side. You're representing the yeses. Your immediate reaction to the New York Times story about pretty much allowing fracking where communities say, yes, we would like to have it.
Yeah, our reaction was that we were pleased that the governor is signaling that this is about to move forward. And it appears as though that is what is happening. We have communities throughout the southern tier that are really in the core of the Marcellus Shale that are overwhelmingly supportive of moving forward with natural gas development. There's a lot of talk about bans, and you've seen bans come in from many communities in the state, but it's strange, Liz, because they're coming from towns that are not in the play. There will never be drilling in there. They might as well be from the state of Maine.
Well, true. I mean, I think they're in twofold, right? Some of them are just want to go on the record as saying we're against it, but others, and do you not agree, have a valid argument, they don't want to be forced to take wastewater that they would have to treat if in fact they had the capability of doing it, or they don't want to see truck traffic. And that's the argument of the folks who are just here, which is you can't contain the impact of drilling to this little area unless, I guess, you drive through Pennsylvania where they're already seeing it.
Right, but there are so many things that we need to do in order to function as a state and as a government, and they're not all things that everybody will like. So if it's left up to each individual town, then how does a state function with all these overriding issues that it needs to accomplish, like an energy policy? The state has to have a valid energy policy. It's crucial not only to New York now, but to our entire nation. Will we actually allow our towns to frustrate that policy?
So what you're saying, and we also just heard from Assemblywoman Lifton, who has this legislation talking about the primacy of home rule, which is in effect when all these small communities are passing a ban saying we don't want this, or a bill or a resolution that says we do want this. In your eyes, one should be equal to the other. Right? If they want it, they should be allowed to have it, if in fact you buy in to the argument of home rule.
Well, I know Assemblywoman Lifton feels very strongly about that process, does not want to ever see any drilling in New York whatsoever. I think she'd like to see other energy sources out there. She comes from Ithaca. Ithaca has a coal-fired power plant right on the banks of Cayuga Lake. Somewhere in this country, mountaintops are being taken down to support electricity in Ithaca, New York, and it doesn't really make sense. I've heard people from Ithaca suggest that, well, we should go more towards renewables. I went to college at Ithaca College. I know that no one in Ithaca is going to stand for windmills around the hills of gorgeous Ithaca. So we hear a lot of things that are just not realistic and don't fit into where we should be going right now in our state and in our country. Okay,
but when you make an argument about sort of an overarching energy policy to allow drilling only in a certain area, and while it's true that of course you're not going to drill outside the Marcellus because that's silly, there's no gas there. Right. There are parts of the Marcellus that would be outside of the area of the zone, if you will, that would be theoretically under this proposal that we think may or may not be out there, right? Because it's not been confirmed yet by the administration formally. That's not piecemeal, just to allow it in certain places. You guys are okay with that?
I think the way that this will happen is that, first of all, we need to have it started. I mean, we've been in this discussion now for 4 years. No state has ever put this type of opportunity on hold the way that New York has. Now, to New York's credit, it's taken a lot of time. It has looked at the issue carefully. We've looked at what's happened in other states. We've looked at what's happened throughout the nation. And so New York now will come out with the best regulations that any state has in our country. But now it's time. So how do you get it started? And I'm fine, and the landowners I represent are fine, if we start with the towns that have expressed that they really would like to have this come to their communities first.
Well, but with the view, I would expect, on the people who are in favor of, once we get it our foot in the door, the likelihood would be that we would expand it.
I think that's the way it will go. If you just look at what's happening in Pennsylvania, it's created so many jobs, and not just jobs that are low-paying jobs. I mean, significant $80,000 a year jobs for people that are just coming out of high school.
Do you really believe that the industry continues to maintain as much interest in this area as it had, particularly because of the time? I mean, you talk to people from the industry and they say, time is running out. If it's overregulated, we're not interested. And, oh, and by the way, natural gas price is incredibly low.
Sure, that's today.
Right.
But what will happen tomorrow? You know, we have energy needs in this country. Very clear if you just look at the president's comments that this country is moving towards natural gas. I mean, even if you wanted to have more wind use, you still have to have a fuel to run the power plants when the turbines aren't turning. So natural gas, I think, is everyone's choice. It's the cleanest. It reduces the carbon emissions. There's fewer greenhouse gases. It just makes the most sense. So that is where the country is going, and as that happens, there will be more demand, and prices will change.
What can you say to people who are uncomfortable with sort of the ancillary impact, which would be, and who insist that there hasn't been sufficient study on public health, on truck traffic, and on the wastewater issue?
You know, after 4 years, we've heard a lot of those arguments. And I guess in the first year, and the second year, and maybe the third, some of those were fine. But we're into this for 4 years. You know, if there are people now coming up with brand new arguments, why are they saying them now and they didn't say them in 2008 or 2009? And I think, frankly, the reason is they just want something to try to hold it up. But clearly there are people here that don't want to see any development whatsoever.
If in fact, let's say that this was sort of like a test case and that you allowed a certain number of wells in areas where, as we talked about, there are communities that are actually amenable to that, and something goes terribly wrong, does the industry accept the fact that it's likely that it will never go anyway? That would be the end of it.
You know, I think a lot of New Yorkers feel that this is brand new, but you know, we've been drilling wells, oil and gas wells in New York. We have 14,000 active wells here right now. We have probably drilled somewhere between 1 million and 2 million wells that have actually used the process of fracking, or hydraulic fracturing. And so we don't have incidents. We have a couple incidents that have happened. You'll have incidents with any kind of energy use. There's always some sort of impact, but it's so minimal after 1 million to 2 million wells. And we talk about Dimock, Pennsylvania, for instance. That's the one example that comes up over and over again.
Right.
And recently the EPA tested their water and said it's fine.
While I have you here, you also are representing a group of landowners, if I'm not mistaken. It has to do with the force majeure action.
That's right.
There was a settlement today between the State Attorney General and Chesapeake. This has to do with, and I'm going to do it in completely layman's terms, so forgive me if I don't hit the legal argument, but getting out of your agreement, your lease agreement, correct, with an energy company because you want to renegotiate it on better terms. So what's the impact of what happened today? Or maybe you just want to get out of it, I should say. What's the impact of what happened today on the folks that you represent? You
know, we are working with over 200 people in Broome and Tioga County, where for the most part they entered into leases that were $3 an acre leases, 12.5% royalty, some 10 to 12 years ago. And they've expired by their terms, there's no question about it. But Chesapeake has come in and said, well, because there are certain impediments in New York to moving forward with high volume hydraulic fracturing,
right,
we should be allowed to extend the lease, even though there's plenty of other drilling going on in New York and other formations. We object to that, and we think that that lease needs to be terminated. Most of our clients want to pursue other opportunities. We're seeing $5,000 an acre leases in Pennsylvania at 20%, and Chesapeake would like to keep us in at $3 an acre, 12.5% royalty. And that's just not fair. The contract has expired. What happened today with the Attorney General's office is helpful for landowners. There are many that don't want to start a lawsuit, but they don't want their lease extended forever. And so the Attorney General agreement at least cuts things off at the end of 2013, which I think is good.
Well, we will be following that, Scott. I want to thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it.